Hi, everyone. Welcome to my session, Cultivating a Culture of Reading Among Teachers. It's going to be short, to the point, and I hope by the end of it, we can leave with something actionable. We can leave with a great conversation starter. As I go through the presentation, I do ask that if there is something that you liked, something that really sparked an idea for you, that you tweet that out using our hashtag for today, hashtag the Ed Collab Gathering, and feel free to tag me on Twitter at lit_bark. So I am your presenter, Dr. Lois Barker, and welcome to my session for the Ed Collab Spring Gathering. Before we dive into just the conversation around cultivating a culture of reading among teachers, we live in a society in where safety is now seeming to be more and more less of a right. It's becoming um, re- uh, high stakes, right? Our safety is very questionable every time we step out the door, when we go to the beach, when we go to church, when we go to other places of worship, when we go to school, we go to the bank, we go to the mall, we go to a concert. There is a lot happening around us. And so at this time, I want to pause for a moment of reflection. We have had hundreds of mass shootings since we ran in 2023. And two that are sitting with me have occurred at schools. As an educator, hearing that kids and teachers um, can lose their lives when school is supposed to be a safe place. School is supposed to be a fun place, and now schools are not as safe. No fault to teachers, no fault to students, but to a system that refuses to do what they need to do to protect lives. And so I want us to think about um, those that we've lost this year. Um, and let's just pause. Our session goals today, we want to talk about what is a reading culture and why might establishing such a culture be important. Explore what teachers are saying about their campuses' reading cultures. Um, Explore ways to create a reading culture and how to remove blockers, because blockers do exist when we talk about creating space for teachers to grow as readers and just enjoy being avid readers. And of course, when all else fails, what can we do? So when we think of culture, culture, like in everyday life, right, we've all learned the basic definition of culture or working definition of culture in our social studies classrooms or sociology classrooms. And we think of culture as sometimes we view culture as something that is stagnant, the way in life of a people, a system of beliefs, the music that a set of people listen to, the faith that they follow, the way that they speak and interact and make decisions, certain behavioral norms. We tend to view culture for the most part as stagnant, when in fact, culture can evolve over time as different influences come into play, right? So when I think of culture, reading culture for this session, reading culture, I want to define that as an environment where reading is valued, celebrated, respected, supported, and encouraged. In this environment, there are communities of readers with shared beliefs or attitudes about reading. Cultivating and maintaining this culture is not the responsibility of an individual or a particular set of people, but it's a shared responsibility. Oftentimes in some of our schools, um, are in our learning communities, reading, the work of reading falls on a librarian or a literacy specialist, and almost always the ELA department, the ELA teacher, right? You should know all the books. You are the readers, and it's very content driven, and it's seen, only in this. I mean, I don't want to say only in this academic viewpoint as kids read. So, for numerous reasons that they need to read, but reading in a sense is life, right? It's a habit that we should develop. It's a skill, but it's an identity, right? And so, it's important that everybody has a role to play in developing a community and creating a culture where, people other than the English teacher, other than the librarian, can develop reading identities, right? And call themselves a reader, regardless of the setting, whether it's academic, whether it's personal, and so on and so forth. So, this is our working definition, for reading culture. Oftentimes when we talk about a reading culture, the it's more student centered, right? And so it's important. It's all good things when we have a campus that's heavily invested in creating readers and supporting readers. um, uh, we tend to have students who are, like, who are empathetic. The more kids read, and especially when our books serve as opportunities for them to see themselves. And of course, I have to pay respects to Dr. Redine Sims Bishop, when she says books, they are windows, mirrors, and sliding glass doors, right? And so when kids see themselves, they feel validated. They have language for things that they're experiencing, so they can share with others. They know how to process information, process feelings. When it serves as windows and sliding glass doors, kids become empathetic because they're looking into the lives of others, understanding, the way other people live, how they deal with certain situations, how they express themselves. Principals, we love having, students read often because, we have the research, we have the literature, we have the evidence that the more kids read, the more, they perform better on assessments and in other academic areas, right? So the more you read, your vocabulary is improved, right? So then it influences how you speak, it influences how you write. um, um, your creativity expands, right? You're developing style, and like you're learning different ways of crafting your thoughts and sharing information. You're getting ideas for new things. When you read, you escape your current world and enter something new, and great things happen, in those places, right? Students also develop routines, and they create reading habits, right? So when we have cultures of reading and it's student centered, we have things like silent sustained reading, literature circles, book clubs, stop, drop, and read, or stop everything and read, dear, right? So we have all these things that become routine, and the idea is that kids fall into this reading habit, right? Yeah, I love to read. If I'm bored, I'm going to read. If I'm excited, I want to process new information, I'm going to read. It's just a habit. It increases memory, right? When students read and they internalize information, the more you read, you can improve your memory to sap up information and remember key details and important information that you acquire. Again, it builds student schema, background knowledge. And it's like going back to books serving as windows and mirrors. It sometimes offers stress relief, right? Sometimes I'm stressed out, I want to go pick up a fun book, and read. I remember picking up The Epic Fail of Arturo Zamora. That book, what like it covered important topics like family, legacy, gentrification, but the humor in that book, and it was upper elementary, middle grade. But here I was, 30 something years old, reading that book and just cracking up because I wanted something light, I wanted something fun. Um, And I found it in that. Judy Bloom books offered stress relief for me. So again, um, oftentimes we think of reading culture, we think of what are we doing to grow, create and support readers in our learning spaces. But sometimes the conversation excludes teachers, right? So again, the research, I have most of the research that I've encountered, a lot of the books that I've read, it's always student centered. How can we support student readers? Sometimes teachers, and I will say, we have literature that suggests, like, if you're an English teacher, you're a librarian, you're going to be reading, right? Because English teachers were reading texts. We're trying to figure out what are some cool books to recommend. For students, and in some of us, we're just naturally readers, and reading doesn't always have to be narrowed to a book. It could be magazines. I consider reading blogs and tweets as reading, audiobooks and all of those things, right? So there is the literature to support that when English teachers are readers, what happens in that classroom. But I am thinking larger scale, right? All teachers on a campus. Let's shift the focus there. And so it's been argued that teachers who are avid readers, they convey their love for reading to their students, and as such serves as role models for students. And then this change attitude student attitudes towards reading, and it develops a positive classroom culture, right? Positive reading culture in that classroom. So when your teachers are excited about, can you see them in the book, you're like, hey miss, what are you reading? Conversation starts. And as readers, just like when, I think I liken it to watching popular shows, right? So if you are a Succession fan, like when you look at how Twitter functions, right? So like if you're a Succession fan or a Game of Thrones fan, or like the latest Netflix sensation, I think Beef, right? So whatever, or The Last of Us, whatever is the show, you watch it, you immediately, like, you run to your friends. If you're, avid Twitter user, you go to Twitter, whatever your social media might be, and you're engaging with others. Like, hey, did you see that last episode? Oh my goodness, I can't believe he lied to her at, season finale. Could you believe in Beef when they were both in the parking lot? Blah blah blah. Like, so you have this excitement, and then when the show is done, you're like, man, now my show is over. What do I watch? Like, this was really good. You watch Beef, you're like, oh man, you should go watch Parasite, or go watch whatever, whatever. And so there is that conversation happen, that social engagement, that interaction, references are flying. It's a cool fellowship when you find a group of people and you're engaged in a show and you like it, and the recommendations, the connections you never thought about making, it happens. The same thing, in a sense, happens with people who are avid readers. You get so excited about a book, you share that excitement, and then you start making connections with other people, making recommendations, and then now you're having a culture, a community develop, right? So in 1999, there was a survey conducted. Yes, it's old. Like I said, when I am having difficulty finding a lot of research encompassing all teachers on a campus, but here we are. So, a survey of elementary teachers found a strong positive association between teachers' personal reading and their use of classroom literacy practices, right? And the research went on to say that when um, highly engaged readers are socially interactive, they tend to draw in other readers. Like I said, kind of similar to when you watch a show and you're on Twitter and you're going back and forth. And so, when you have a place, you have a learning space where teachers, again, going beyond the ELA teacher, going beyond the librarian or the media specialist, um, when you have that happening, we're excited to share, and you have that back and forth. And with that back and forth comes deep conversations, personal connections, shared understandings, newly developed understandings. Um, you have different relationships being formed, right? A kid doesn't feel like, oh, I need to run to my ELA teacher to talk about this book. I can talk about this sci-fi thing with my physics teacher. I can talk about this thing that I'm reading with the health teacher, because they're into X, Y, and Z, right? So it becomes a campus of readers and cool shifting of information. And so kids have role models, um, outside of the expected place, outside of the expected yearly classroom. And so the attitude towards reading is different, right? Now, it's not to say that everyone will miraculously like become avid readers, or everyone's going to always want to talk about books, but the idea is that there is a comfort level and an acceptance level when you start talking about books, sharing books, and just reading becomes a norm. Reading becomes a part of the mosaic, of the overall school culture. And so, what, and just as how we do these things to lure kids in, then thinking about what can we do to lure other teachers in. So if you have a few who are reading, how can we spread that love? How can we create that joy, specifically teacher focused, right? So, um, I want you, take some time and think about this. Are you in a reading community, whether it's personal or whether it's something campus based? So what does your reading community look like? So for me, I have reading community, a community at work, because we have book clubs at work, adult focused book clubs at work. So that's a space for me. I have a reading community on Twitter. If you follow the book chat led by Scott and Joel, it's amazing. And so I have community there. I have community with friends. I have friends scattered across the globe. And so I have community there. We read books. We talk about movies. We make connections like, yo, I watched this show. It was really cool. And then there's a friend in that group that's like, well, if you like the show, you better go read this book. It's the same thing. So I have reading community professionally as well as personally. Is there a reading culture in your learning space? What does it look like? If not, how come? Um, so, at my previous learning space, the campus setting, uh, there wasn't an authentic reading culture. The reading culture was, again, on the shoulders of the ELA teacher in conjunction with the librarian. The reading culture was very much a forced initiative where the first 10 minutes of class, we have to stop and everybody read. It wasn't, and it only happened in the ELA classroom. Not that that's a bad thing. We have to start somewhere, right? We have to make space for independent reading. But it was, and everybody must do this every day or else. Um, then it evolved into a share. It evolved into something punitive, and it had to look a certain way. So it had to look as a hardcover book. It had to look as, oh, it was not very inclusive. Okay, so it had to be a hardcover book. It typically no magazines. Um, it was no audiobooks. Again, it's a traditional, you get a book from this library, from the classroom library or the school library, public library. It had to be a hard copy book, a physical book, and you had to read. And then there was some log, some reader's response. It was a choice board, but it wasn't. It was always something test driven, because we needed data for a test, so that the kids, for someone who was not an avid reader, a budding reader, it was not the best environment because it wasn't welcoming. It felt as one other thing. And again, once kids left that space, they could not engage with other teachers about what they've read. It became the job of the ELA teacher. And as a teacher, I was supposed to be reading, but reading with the intention of making sure other kids are reading as well. Some teachers, again, use that as an opportunity to grade, like different things. And so it was a forced reading culture upon the students. Now, when we think about a reading culture among teachers, that was non-existent outside of the ELA slash studies group of teachers. They were reading back and forth, and because of planning, because of how meetings happened, there was little engagement. Shared story. Now, for you, think about, did this come now? If you do have a reading community, or if one existed on your campus, right? And it was, again, not just confined to the ELA classroom, but let's think about across campus. Did it look differently pre-COVID? Was there a different type of culture, reading culture on your campus pre-COVID? And in addition to COVID, let's talk about the major blatant political attacks on books. It's easy for some folks, like at this point, it's become a privilege to talk about access to books and how we're freely reading in classrooms and the type of books that we can read and all the cool things that are happening with diverse books, that are being published, and putting them in front of kids. Also, the freedom teachers once had, reading and bringing books in and sharing with each other and sharing with their students, that has changed, in some parts of the country, due to a war on books. And so think about these things. Take a minute, reflect. Now, some teacher stories. It's a little bit small, but I'm going to read some of these to you. So, this is from an ALA teacher. This teacher has two preps. They teach ninth grade and 10th grade ELA, and they're in North Texas. And this is what they shared with me. At my campus, I don't really have time to read for fun. I try my best to read the required readings in the curriculum and popular YA selections to make recommendations to my students. However, I don't read for fun for myself. I wish I had more time. I have two different preps, and I'm a mentor teacher, so I have additional district meetings and training I have to attend. Here's a story from a Nevada elementary teacher, second grade. At my school, my principal was a former middle school ELA teacher, so reading is an important part of our campus culture. She encourages book fairs and authors' visits. She's an avid reader. She reads plenty of picture books, professional texts, and adult novels. She has a bulletin board in her office with three columns: my fun reads, my growth reads, and I'm thinking that's the professional text, and my student friendly reads. Independent reading is a part of our daily routine. There are reading nooks in our cafeteria and small play areas so kids can read anytime. I read picture books in my class, and on my breaks, I read my adult reads. She also encourages teacher book clubs. Isn't that amazing? That's amazing. And I love that idea of the three columns: my fun reads, so what am I reading personally, my growth reads, how am I growing professionally, and my student friendly reads, my student recommendations. I think that's an amazing idea to have. um, and here's a story from a teacher in New York, English teacher, middle school. We are a small school, and although I have multiple preps, our principal tries his best to promote reading on our campus. We have a librarian who comes 3 times a week, and he organizes amazing programs for our students, such as virtual author visits, book clubs with a middle school in his hometown in California, and takes the students to local book festivals. He also started an adult book club that meets monthly at a local coffee shop. I go along with the assistant principal, the math teacher, and our receptionist, and one of our cafeteria ladies. There we meet folks from his friend circle, and it is so cool to have time to relax and read for fun and engage in discussion that carries back to the campus from the coffee shop. So, what how like look at how amazing that feels when you have leadership that supports reading, when you have leadership that believes in a culture of reading, not just a, not just student centered reading, but teacher centered reading. Here are some more teacher stories. This is from a Texas middle school principal. My teachers and I are all avid readers. We talk about what we're reading, we share or swap books, and we just truly enjoy being in reading communities. This energy transfers into their classroom as we encourage reading across contents. Um, let's go to this one. Ohio ELA 10th grade teacher. Let's just say that at my school, reading happens in the ALA classroom and maybe the social studies classroom per admin. We have to drop everything and read. We have drop everything and read, but it became a thing to do or else and not part of something authentic. However, many teachers don't care for it during the homeroom period and end up grading. I try to read a personal selection. Sometimes I read books in my classroom library so I can have conversations with my students and make recommendations. I only talk to the teachers in my department about books. This comes from a Florida ELA teacher, high school, ninth grade. This is really an awkward time for everyone. Before this major offensive on books, I would say the reading culture on my campus was more student centered, but the principal and librarian worked hard to ensure that reading wasn't forced. They had cool ways to get other teachers involved and had amazing reading suggestions for each content. Math teachers moved from sci fi to romance novels. It was amazing to see. Staff meetings were fun and we had book swaps. Now we don't feel safe even talking about what we read. We are frustrated, and so are the kids. And the final story, I had so many teacher stories, but the final one, because I want to give like a nice array of what that looks like across the country. Again, I'm from Texas, so I have a little bit more Texas stories. This is from a middle school assistant principal. I want to create a culture of reading among teachers, but it's difficult. I talk about books with a librarian and do my best to engage teachers, but they don't seem interested other than reading and teaching what is in the curriculum. So here we have some stories, right? We saw like an array of stories, right? So I had other stories from like multiple stories from California. I had stories from like Seattle where teachers feel supported and they are able to have groups among other teachers, right? It was really interesting from the Florida teacher to see that, you know, all teachers were involved in the adult side, teacher centered side of reading, where you have math teachers getting into sci-fi and then growing after having multiple suggestions, being around other teachers, move into romance, right? Because sometimes we like to put people in boxes. Like you're the science teacher, so you're probably going to want to read sci-fi because they have some science stuff in there, some math stuff. That's what you're going to, but you'll never think of the science teacher just wanting to escape with romance because people are people. Right. And so it's just really cool to hear these stories of these adults being avid readers, having an opportunity to swap and talk about books and grow. I love the story from the middle school Texas principal that talks about the entire campus. We're all avid readers, and that energy trickles into the classroom. So even though there are like more teacher centered, once you have teacher centered reading culture, it's going to eventually seep into your student centered reading culture, and both work together to become part of the overall campus, like the campus habit, right? What's part of your campus culture? Teachers and students read for fun, for growth, to recommend to each other. Reading is just what we do here, right? So, where do we start? What does that look like? So, for starters, right, when I spoke with a lot of leaders, because I wanted to move away from it's being strictly the job of the English teacher to go start the book club, rally your colleagues together and let's develop reading culture. Let's create reading communities. So I wanted to start with leadership. A lot of the times, leaders can give you the space to run with an idea, shut down ideas. Sometimes it needs to come from the leader that reading is a priority. Reading is something welcome here, supported outside of academic gains. Um, and so starting with leadership was great because sometimes leadership, they're the ones to removing major blockers that can prevent teachers from cultivating or creating reading communities, right? They control the blockers that make or break reading cultures among teachers. So thinking about some places to start, whether you are watching this and you are in some form of leadership on your campus, whether you are a teacher leader, or maybe you want to have a conversation with your administration about, I think, yes, we do these things for students, but I want my colleagues to have space and time to read. I feel like, our reading communities will be better supported once we have teacher communities or whatever the case might be. And here are some starting points, right? So it's really important to get to know teachers' reading journeys and attitudes towards reading. So whoever is leading this work, to not make this feel forced, just as how, like, sometimes in our classrooms when we start doing, I mean, it's like I you can mirror what you do for students with adults, give or take, right? So typically, getting to know my students, I like to start with surveys. Fun things that I like to do with some of with students, and we in developing reading cultures, or just getting to know who they are as readers, right? Because reading is a part of my identity. I am a reader. There's books behind me right here. There's books everywhere. So I am a reader, and so how do I get to know if my students are readers? And what do I need to know about them to support them? All right, to grow them, just help them blossom into a reader. And it's really important to you can do that through surveys. You can do that through fun games. I know, like, one way I like to figure out what people are into is through story cubes, right? So one of my introductory activities is, let's just write a fun story. Let's just see how your brain works. Where does your imagination lead you? And so everybody gets story cubes. I'm a comic book person. So again, that's reading. And I like to take story cubes. I have like Batman story cubes. And so everybody gets like one or two cubes. They have the Q key that tells them what the images stand for. And so I'm like, all right, roll your cubes. And whatever it lands on, mark your cue. Like you have your two cubes, you roll it. Write down what it says. And we talk about, and when I do this with students, I do it with adults too, but when I do it with students, as well as adults, I ask, like, so we're going to write a piece of fiction here, right? You have whatever so some of your cubes might give you a setting, a conflict. It might give you characters only. So whatever it is, work with it that way. Excuse me. And then we're going to talk about, so what's the typical structure of a story, a piece of fiction, right? What are some elements? And with students, they'll throw out, oh, in your introduction you have your setting, you get introduced to your characters, and then comes the conflict. We go up the mountain thing, and then boom, everything explodes. Then we have the fall in action, and we have some type of resolution. And I love it when kids are like, wait a minute now. Sometimes you can have branching off, right? Two stories happening at once, two storylines happening. They come back or they don't come back. Sometimes we have cliffhangers and all of the fun stuff. So I let them, share everything they think about when we hear creating a work of fiction, and they do that. And then I let them write, and as they're writing, I throw in some things in there, right? So y'all, I want some dialogue, but in your dialogue, I want someone to make some mythological reference, and I don't, or like something to folklore. And I want, and like, you can give me a Greek reference, you can give me a Roman reference, you can give me a cultural reference. So for me, I'm from the Caribbean. So you might end up getting some type of Caribbean folklore. So give me what you know, give me what's authentic to you. I'm getting insight into are the students familiar with Greek folklore, are they in tune with their cultural traditions, et cetera, et cetera. When I say give me dialogue in language that's natural to you, right? And then sometimes based on the genre, their story, there's or takes, that I know, okay, they like romance. Because if you're getting Batman and Joker and you end up giving me a romance, I'm like, oh, that's interesting because I was gonna, give you a thriller. I was gonna give you like straight up action. So like seeing what they get and where the story is going is the same for adults. It kind of gives you some insight onto perhaps what genres do they like reading, right? So that's a great starter into how are you getting to know people, their reading preferences, if you want to move away from like the typical survey, right? um their journeys, like you can do cool storyboards and timelines. What does your reading journey look like? When did you first encounter reading? What was your first book? When did you fall out of love with reading and why? Now what prevents you from reading, or what does your reading look like? So when I was in grad school, prior to grad school, I read lots of comics. I read lots of thrillers. I loved horrors. I was reading tons and tons and tons of YA and middle grade books. And then I entered grad school. All of that stopped, and everything became like studies and research articles and more professional text because I wanted more context for what I was, looking for, and how I was informing my practice and conducting my research and all of that jazz. Right now that I'm done, and I'm more in um, a technology setting. Now I'm reading other things. I'm still reading professional stuff because I want to inform how I can expand my understanding of technology and education. But I'm going back to reading, but now I'm reading for me. Right, I'm not reading books to make recommendations for students or teachers or to build curriculum. Now I'm just reading for me. So I'm falling in love with other stuff. Right, so my new read right now, the Bandit Queens, right? So that's what I'm reading for me. I'm also speaking of, I'm also reading this beautiful book about Dominican fantasy, right? I just wrapped up, and we're in Poetry Month. Above Ground, Clint Smith, awesome, right? So I'm back to reading for fun. And so that's part of my reading journey. So it's really important to get to know the teachers around you. What do their journeys look like? How do they feel about reading? um and so on and so forth. Then you want to kind of, sometimes it's okay to lean on your avid readers to be key players in culture cultivation. Um, because, and if it happens to be your ELA teacher, it happens to be your ELA teacher. Because sometimes those avid readers, they have a plethora of references, right? They can, you tell them, yo, I am really into like cliffhangers, right? But I like low, easy cliffhangers. I don't care who the audience is directed to. I'll read anything, or I'll watch, like if they're a watcher and they're like, I'll watch anything with a cliffhanger. You could be, okay, read Allegedly by Tiffany Jackson. Yes, the audience might be young adults, but yo, you're gonna toss the book when you're done. Read Monday Is Now Coming, also by Tiffany Jackson. Right? Like queen of twists at the end, if that's what you want, right? So you can make those recommendations. Avid readers, your eager readers, they will have that plethora of titles and to pull from, right? Whether it's your ELA teacher, whether it's your librarian. And don't be shocked if one of your avid readers, the person that you lean on, may not be the ELA teacher, and that's okay. But as you learn more about the reading journeys of your colleagues or the teachers that you support, see who your avid readers are, pick their brains to see, hey, I'm trying to do this thing, right? Among the teachers, because I know once our teachers are reading and having fun, about it, you know, it's going to influence students' attitudes, right? And so see how their what do their reading communities look like? How do they cultivate a reading culture in their classroom, their homes, in their friend circle? And see how you can lean on them, their strengths, to help you do that at school on a larger scale. Revisit meeting structures and flex time in daily schedules, right? Like when I read a lot of the teacher stories that I received around this topic, a lot of it was I don't have extra time to read, right? I get to school at 7:30. I gotta prep, be ready at 8, back-to-back classes, like a hot second lunch because I have to walk the kids to the cafeteria, gobble my own food, get them, go back to my class. My off period is filled with, I'm doing my like grading, I'm doing X, Y, and Z. I get home, I help my kids with homework, or I get home, I have to go to the gym because health is important to me. Whatever it is, I just want to take a nap and breathe. These last 3 years have been super stressful for educators. It's not a kind world out there for educators, right? Heck, you got to go to therapy. You have to do things after work, right? To pour into your spirit. And so reading may not be at the top of that list. And so, like, if you want to be a part of a reading community, maybe it needs to happen in that 9 to 5, because at home you have other things to do, until reading becomes this part of your habit, or you do read and you don't feel like sharing how you read, that mode of reading, because you've been shamed. Like, people shame people for, oh, you read blogs, that's not real reading, or you listen to audiobooks, well, that's not real reading because you're not paying attention, right? So there's some stigmas around our different preferences. But if we are to be truly an inclusive reading community, then we have to kind of support how people take what people read, and their method of reading, what it looks like, right? And so again, revisiting meeting structures. Not every time there is a staff meeting, we need a awkward icebreaker. There's some fun icebreakers and there's some awkward icebreakers. Maybe instead of like icebreakers, we have, and here are the ideas. So I'm going to go with starters, and some ideas might be, I don't know, a teacher book talk. So when you look at your structure of meetings, can meetings be shorter, or can some of the bulletiny stuff, the reminders, be emails? And so when you come to the meeting, you can create space for your teachers to read. Maybe it can be like starting with a book talk, and then people actually have some time to just chill and read and have conversations. Maybe not all, like, you can have flex time in the day. Some campuses, you have like half days, in the afternoon is professional development. But not everybody. Why can't professional development be reading? Like, why can't people sit down and actually read and talk about what they're reading? That's literacy. I'm reading, I'm talking, I'm listening, I'm writing. Why can't it be literature circles? People like engage in a genre that they like, or they, like, a group of people get together. We love Jason Reynolds, so we're going Jason Reynolds over here, we're going to Octavia Butler over here, we're going to Stephen King or whomever back there. And why can't literature circles be an opportunity for professional development? Because like, components, the people are engaging in literacy, right? Literacy across contents. So those are just some ways to rethink flex time in the day, meeting structures, and just think about some of the duties we ask of teachers, right? um, if we have student aides to make copies, or you have, like, just kind of seeing if you can, like, transform the day to day, so you can create space for teachers to become readers and talk about reading, um and so on and so forth. Another thing, I create spaces for that serve as adult reading book notes. How's your teachers lounge looking? Can teachers have a cool book nook too in the library? Can there be like a teacher section in the library? Some libraries have like conference rooms dedicated for, staff only spaces. In your staff only spaces, what does that look like? In your principal's office, your admin office, your teacher leaders spaces, what does that look like? Can teachers escape and read in an off period? Um, during lunch, can teachers have quiet to read? Is lunch even long enough to read? And this is from a charter school, right? One story, this is a charter school, in where, oh my goodness, the state is leaving me. It's a charter school up north, and the principal looked at the bell schedule to make space to give everybody a longer lunch. So the lunch moved from 30 minutes to 50 minutes, and teachers could actually read. So during that time, book club happened. And it was like sit and eat and just decompress, and you had book club happening. They even had like uh audio book club. So like he like, well, some teachers like, look, some book clubs move too fast. Can we do like audio book club? And it was audiobooks, and so they could like, well, at this, it was really funny because they had their time stamps and everything going, but that's how they internalized whatever. And so there was like audio book club, and then you had this book club happening, but it didn't matter, even though they were both like different communities, but there was a culture of reading among teachers. There was a blog club, with for the teachers, but all of these teachers had space during lunchtime to do so. And they did not do it away from kids. So like there was this like room that looks out. They had like an open courtyard situation, and so there's a nice little a room that feeds out into the courtyard, and kids can eat. And so kids would see their teachers sitting around, and not just the English teachers, the gym teacher. You had like, your the sped co teacher. Everybody was in that room, like mixed across all contents, reading and laughing and talking about books. And he said kids would start like, what are y'all in there giggling about? Oh, like, oh, coach, you read? Yeah, I read. What are you reading? And conversations just sparked. Next thing you know, the track team had a book club. They started with their track books because track people like to run, and by Jason Reynolds, the kids wanted the track series. They read that, and then next thing you know, they migrated to something else, like more, like other things, other sport related books, and sometimes just life topics, right? And so again, the power of seeing your teachers read and engage and just talk about it for fun. And there was no reading response for those for the teachers. The teachers, after they did it, they would just move on to the next book. Like they had the conversations and they moved on. And so when what he did share, what started happening with one of his ELA teachers was when she started feeling just the release of not always having to annotate, write. She goes, "Whoa, I wonder how my kids feel." Every time they read something, and during independent reading time, I'm like, all right, reader response, why can't I just shut down and have discussions? But when I give assessments, I can give them the option of what we're reading in class. Throw in a bonus point, not give them the option. I think she threw in a bonus question that took the concept of the skill to apply to their independent reading books. And that shifted, like she said, she saw. So for the kids who weren't really engaging in reading during that independent time, and they were literally just like book gazing, she saw a shift when she said it's okay if you want to read a magazine, because they're articles, and so you can reference the article depending on the question, right? Whatever skill we're learning, you can reference that article, you can reference that blog. There was a shift. The culture started changing. And so that happens once space is created. Um, Again, acknowledging that reading looks different for everyone, right? So going back to being more inclusive, who prefers audio, right? Do I read magazines? Do I read newspapers? Do I like blogs? Um, yes, we like a solid book, like book club, but that's okay if I don't always have the time to dive into this. Sometimes I like to actually dive into a good journal because there's things that I'm trying to understand, right? Different experiences that I want to have. I enjoy getting my AAA travel magazines because I'm learning about different parts of the world, different festivals. That's reading, that's building schema right there. And so again, just being a bit more inclusive when we say we're building a reading community or we're cultivating a culture of readers, of reading among teachers, and just making sure people are welcomed, right? And they don't feel like they're going to be judged because of their platform of reading or method of reading. And so here are some ideas. Again, we talk, I shared um, you know, uh talking about books in meetings, creating like a teacher library at the staff lounge or a teacher section, facilitating book clubs. Organize trips to book festivals. Teachers like a nice trip, and it doesn't have to be school funded. Like, sometimes things doesn't it doesn't always have to be confined to campus. Again, that depends on the relationship you have. But teacher retreats, right? Instead of going to your traditional teacher retreat, you can go to a book festival. We all read these books. Let's go talk to some authors. Great things happen at the Texas Book Festival. There's lots of like volunteer opportunities within some of these organizations giving back to literacy, right? And so there is some professional growth that happens, even though it's also fun, right? Who says professional growth and volunteering can't be fun and fulfilling? um, Group visits to author lectures, imprint here in Houston, if you're in the Houston area, Imprint, they have amazing author talks and workshops, and I love going to them because I'm reading a book and then I'm hearing the author talk about craft. I'm hearing the author talk about all the background influences that came into the book. I'm hearing the author talk about like what they're up against, like in terms of marketing their book, or are their books being banned, and how we need to like come together and fight these book bans and educate people on the impact of book bans in classrooms, and then communities as a whole when people are threatening to close down libraries. So a lot can happen when you go to these author lectures. You develop partnerships with authors and publishers, and sometimes before you know, your classroom has free books. Your kids get a free virtual workshop. So a lot of good things can come out of those visits. Have fun book swaps. Sometimes, like we all there, instead of doing like a friends giving, you can do a book giving. Like there are different things that can be done to just encourage love of reading among teachers. um Host creative pre and after reading activities. Paint and sips are fun, right? So like you've read the book, now you're gonna paint, like pick a theme, pick a character. How did you envision this character? Paint the person. Or maybe it's a particular setting that the book takes place in, and you do like a nice paint and sip with that particular setting in mind, and then you launch into the book. Cooking is always a vibe. You can't go wrong with cooking. Like Elizabeth Acevedo's The Fire and High, tons of recipes in there. So imagine that, like, you're doing book club and you pause after a few chapters. We're gonna cook this recipe, or you've read it, and after you've read it, now we're gonna go try this recipe or whatever. There's like, and then you can, if you have a culinary program on your campus, you can bring the students in to be a part of the recipe and the pre and after activity. Like a lot of amazing things can happen there. Create reading lists paired with podcasts, playlists, and shows and movies. I'm now, the name is leaving me and I should have mentioned, but on Instagram there is this account I follow, and they share, like, if you like this TV show, then here are the books that you want to read. Things like that is a easy lure into reading, right? On Amazon, I fell in love with this series. Is it The Lost Pines or The Three Pines? I'm like, oh my gosh, I binged it in like 3 4 days. Then it was over, and I'm like, where do I go now? This was so good. Then a friend of mine saw a tweet and she was like, girl, do you know that's based on a book? I'm like, get out of here. Now, in my to be read list, I have the stack of books part of that series was based on, because I don't want to wait for Amazon to turn it into something. I'm invested, I'm in it now. And so there's like just different ways of luring people into reading and just growing and supporting them. All right, so what are your thoughts? Okay. What are your thoughts? How do you feel? Do you feel that cultivating a reading culture among teachers at your school is possible? What support would you need? to be successful, right? Whether that support is from me, whether that support is from others who are watching this, or once you tweet this out there on Twitter, like what support? Hey, I want to, get teachers, like expand reading outside of just the ELA department. How do I get other teachers involved? How do I do a teacher book club? Like help me. And so what do you think you need to be successful? And like part of this reflection comes with the what else, right? So depending on where you are, we know that there is a war in books and it's really tricky. Depending on your learning context, there is a lot of emphasis on testing. And so, like, teacher book clubs may not be a priority from leadership. So, what do you do? Um, like, who do you turn to? Like, looking outside of the learning community is always a good option. So, if leadership is not going to support, if campus leadership is not going to create space, remove blockers like scheduling conflicts, unnecessary meetings, and just making it happen so teachers can and develop reading communities on campus, then what about outside spaces? A lot of bookstores have book clubs. There are a lot of virtual book clubs. So then how can you invite other readers to join you outside of school, and foster reading? And then the conversations can still happen at school, right? And then seep into our classroom. Sometimes that's an option. Sometimes leaders want to do these things on their campus, but then central office doesn't allow them to do it, right? There's always someone higher up that blocks something amazing from happening. And so there's always the community to lean on, right? There, like I said, here we have organizations like Imprint that can help. We have bookstores. We have a lot of independent bookstores that Kindred Stories. We have Brazos bookstores. We have Blue Willow bookstores here in Houston. They all have amazing book clubs that people can be a part of, and authors come and cool things happen. And so sometimes we have to step outside of school to engage in that type of community, but the behaviors, the conversations, the ideas flow back into the school. And finally, as I end here, and I'm probably a little bit over my time, but we have to protect books. I am inviting everyone to please, like a lot of states, you're having your legislative periods right now, and a lot of bills are coming and circling around books, and it doesn't seem to be going away. This, like, calling it a distraction, calling it not a distraction, but we have to protect books and we have to save libraries. Places are threatening to shut down or defund libraries. Imagine that libraries are safe spaces for a lot of people. When I migrated here in 1999, I like my like being able to survive in a new country, in a new place. The library was a huge help for me and my family, and I could not imagine not having access to that library. That taught me about American culture, that taught me how to use a computer to the best of my ability, that taught me how to do more about taxes and applying for college and aid, and giving me my first volunteer opportunity to work with adult learners. Like, I could not imagine the library not being there. And so pay attention to the bills and policies that are floating around, those conversations around book banning. The names are shifting and they're calling it different things, but it's all the same. It's all about removing kids' access to diverse books. I urge you, like, sometimes, like, if it's not safe for you to put your face out there, find people who are willing to speak on your behalf. Flood your politicians' emails, phone lines, mailboxes, letting them know the harm that their actions and their words are having on students, on communities, when they talk about removing books and having strict requirements when we try to, like, acquire books for our classrooms and our schools. If you can, testify at hearings at your state capitol. If it's open testimony where you can sign up and tell your story, sign up and tell your story. Bring other teachers, as long as you have admin district support, do it. excuse my typo, reach out to professional organizations. You have Pen America, you have NCTE. Reach out for help. Like if you don't feel safe putting yourself out there because like your certification might be at risk, your job might be at risk, reach out. There are resources. There are people willing to be your mouthpiece, willing to point you in the right direction, helping you get that information to where it needs to go anonymously. Speak out at board meetings. We have to protect books. We have to save libraries because what is happening and what has been happening is not right. Um, I hope that this session was helpful in some shape or fashion. I hope that you have some ideas, turning in your head, and you can run back to your campus and try something, or go to a drawing board and see what can happen for next year, or whatever the case might be. So again, thank you for hanging with me here for the last hour. Tweet out whatever reflections you have using the hashtag you see on the slide, and feel free to tag me in it. Again, enjoy the rest of the day. We have some amazing sessions coming your way and an amazing keynote. Thank you. Bye.